Good day, my name is Collene and I will be presenting a literary analysis on the novel Trifles, written by Susan Glaspell. Susan Glaspell was born in 1876 in Davenport, Iowa. She graduated from Drake University with a PhD in philosophy in 1899. She was awarded the Pulitzer Award in 1931 for her play Alice's House. She was also married to her husband, Mr. John Wright. There were 7 characters in the play Trifles. First was George Henderson. George Henderson was a county attorney that was called to investigate the murder of John Wright. He was a sexist and was positive that Mrs. Wright committed the crime with no real proof. Henry Peters was the sheriff and husband of Mistress Peters. He was responsible for examining the scene of the crime. Louis Hale was a neighboring farmer. He was the first person to find John Wright's dead body. He commented on how oddly Mistress Wright was acting when he first entered the home. Mistress Peter was married to the sheriff. Mrs. Hale was married to Mr. Hale. John Wright was a farmer that was married to Mrs. Wright. He was a sexist and dominated his wife. Mrs. Wright was the wife of Mr. John Wright and was the main suspect in her husband's murder. Symbolism. There were numerous symbolisms throughout the play, but I will speak on 3. The first one is the canary bird. The canary bird, a sing-song bird, represents the free spirit of Mrs. Wright from the day she was Minnie Foster. The death of the bird represents the diminished spirit of Mrs. Wright. Mrs. Wright was always a happy, jolly person. The broken jazz. The jazz are broken due to the cold weather. This signifies how Mrs. Wright's life was broken apart after becoming married. The incomplete quilt. The incomplete quilt made the women believe that it was possible that Mrs. Wright did in fact murder her husband. The cultural and social values in the play Trifles overlapped. The cultural values of the early 1900s represented gender inequality. This meant that men and women were treated differently. During the time that Trifles was written, women did not have the right to vote, or they could not even sit on juries. They had little to no protection for women that was being domestically abused. The men believed that the women worry over the little things, hence the name Trifles. However, the women believe that there are huge meanings in the little things. The women was ignored throughout the whole investigation. They found numerous of evidence such as the incomplete quilt, the similarities between Mr. Wright's death and the bird, the bread that was left out of the box, and the frozen preserve. But all of this was completely dismissed from the men. The women were seen as lower social standards and not important to society and was treated unfairly. Their opinions was neglected, and to the men, it did not matter. The cultural and social values in the play overlapped. The cultural values showed that there was gender inequality. The women was treated different from the men. The men was dominant, assertive, and was always in charge. The women was more modest and was seen as a low status in society. Their views and opinions was not heard, whether inside or outside the home. The women was domesticated. They were responsible for cooking, cleaning, washing, and taking care of the kids. The women lacked individuality. Once they were married, they were seen as their husband's property. The author Susan Glaspell showed examples of oppression throughout the play. In one of the scenes, she said the men entered the home first, and then the women followed after and huddled together. This showed dominance. The men was looking for evidence that would help solve the murder case of Mr. John Wright. The women also found evidence, but the men dismissed them. The men was motivated by power and the love being in charge. The evidence that the men overlooked were the same evidence that the women found that was later on used to solve the murder of Mr. John Wright. As it relates to social values, the women's responsibility in society was to maintain the home. They were not allowed to vote or to be a juror. They had no protection against domestic abuse. Summary and conclusion. Mr. John Wright was strangled to death with a rope in his farmhouse. The main suspect of the crime was his wife, Mrs. John Wright. As the county attorney, Sheriff Peter, and a neighboring farmer named Mr. Hale was responsible for investigating the house for clues and anything that will point them to the suspect of the murder. But the real investigator was Mrs. Peter and Mrs. Hall. Throughout the play, the men made fun of the women for worrying about female things like the finished quilt or the untidiness of the house. It's the ladies' attention to women's stuff that allows them to crack the case. When the ladies discovered Mrs. Wright's pet canary bird with its neck broken, they immediately put the mystery together. Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peter know that the Mr. Wright snapped the canary's neck, and that after years of neglect and emotional abuse, Mrs. Wright repaid her husband by giving him a taste of what her bird got. The play comes to a spine-tingling conclusion when the ladies hid the bird from the male authority, denying them the evidence of motive they need to convict Mrs. Wright. In the end, they were left with many unanswered questions about the true meaning of justice for women and oppressed people everywhere.